وسهلا بكل الذين ينضموا للاستماع إلى راديو بلدي، أول راديو عربي أمريكي ويعنى بقضايا العرب في المهجر. برامجنا في راديو بلدي كل يوم جمعة من 8 وحتى 9 صباحا مع ليلى الحسيني في بث حي ومباشر وعبر WNZK راديو 690 AM. صباح الخير بلدي، صباح الخير لكل مستمعينا.
Welcome to Radio Baladi, the first Arab, Middle Eastern, and American simulcast radio show. Radio Baladi is broadcast every Friday morning on WNZK 690 AM from 8 until 9 Eastern Time on Good Morning Michigan with Layla Al-Husseini. Our call-in number 248-557-3300. And now, stay tuned for the best radio talk show on Arab and American issues with your host, Layla Al-Husseini.
This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Join me on the third Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll be discussing some of the most important current political, economic, and social issues in my program, The Bridge. On Radio Baladi, on America's Voice of the Arabs, WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM. Good morning, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis. Welcome to another great program on Radio Baladi on US Arab Radio. Today we are talking about the Trump versus the Congress, the debate about the Khashoggi Investigation and the tug of war between Trump and the Congress regarding this investigation. There is no doubt that this has been a very important topic that has occupied international media attention and press coverage globally, but it had also had important echoes and effects and implications domestically as well. And the clearest example has been this tug of war between President Trump and his administration on one hand, and the Congress on the other hand, regarding the degree of transparency in these investigations around this horrific crime, and establishing accountability by bringing those who are responsible for it to justice and actually to pay for their own evil acts. To better understand this complex dynamic of this particular struggle and the various debates around it and its multiple implications, I have two distinguished guests with me this morning discussing this important topic. Mr. Michael Dora is the Washington Advocacy Manager at the Committee to Protect Journalists. He leads efforts to advance press freedom around the world with the U.S. government and other policymakers in Washington, D.C. Prior to joining the Committee to Protect Journalists, he served as Director of Government Affairs and as the main representative to the United Nations at the Center for Inquiry. Michael was twice elected President of the United Nations NGO Committee on Freedom of Religion or Belief in New York, and he has a master's degree in political science from Brooklyn and started his career as an editor at Fox News. My second guest, Mr. Thomas Melia, is the Washington Director of PEN America, who leads the organization's advocacy efforts in the nation's capital. He served in the Obama administration as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights and Labor, responsible for Europe and Eurasia, South and Central Asia and the Middle East. He also served as Assistant Administrator for Europe and Eurasia in the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, until January 2017. He is also a monthly columnist for the American Interest. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
Good morning.
Thanks
for having us.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So I've had guests from the Committee to Protect Journalists before on my show here on US Arab Radio. It is the first time to have someone from PEN America. So Tom, if you can please start by just giving our listeners a brief idea about PEN America and the mission that you are trying to accomplish in your own organization, please.
Sure, I'd be glad to do that. PEN is an organization of writers. PEN as in mightier than the sword. So we believe in the importance of literature and writing and, of course, reading. And so we celebrate literature and writers and readers. In recent years, we've become more involved in the policy sphere, advocating for freedom of expression inside the United States and around the world. And so on a number of matters, we joined forces with CPJ and other allies to lend our voices to support policies that will defend and advance freedom of expression. I should say that with Jamal Khashoggi, who I had the honor to meet a few occasions, we mourn his passing as a fellow writer. We feel like somebody from our family has been taken from us, and so that really has animated our organization to become active on advancing the case of justice for Jamal.
I also read in your bio the part about advocacy in Washington, D.C. What does that entail in terms of trying to influence maybe decision makers when it comes to issues of freedom of the press or freedom of expression?
Well, we're a membership organization, so we have people who are part of our association in every state in the United States. And so as a group of citizens, we speak up and raise our voices with our elected officials, both in the executive branch and particularly in the legislative branch. You know, the United States is unusual among the democracies in that our Congress plays a large role in a lot of aspects of policy making in foreign policy as well as domestically. So we're advancing the argument for defending net neutrality so that everybody that wants to go online can get access to the internet no matter which service provider they use, and we also are busy on questions about Freedom of Information Act requests to different government agencies so that citizens can get access to publicly created information. So there's a range of things that we do in the United States as well as internationally. But it's on the basis that we're a membership organization and we have American citizens and residents who are part of our club, and on their behalf is who we're speaking for.
Thank you so much for this explanation, and welcome to the show for the first time on U.S. Arab Radio. Thank you so much.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. Michael, the essence of the tug of war, which is the subject of today's discussion and program really, the tension or the conflict between Trump and his administration on one hand and the U.S. Congress on the other hand when it comes to the investigation surrounding the horrific murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. If you can explain to our listeners what is the essence and the reason behind this tension or this conflict, please.
Sure, and thank you again for having me. It's great to be on. After Jamal Khashoggi was found out to have been murdered in the Saudi consular building in Istanbul, Turkey, the chairs and the top minority, so the top-ranking Republican and the top-ranking Democrat in the past session of Congress on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the House Foreign Affairs Committee sent a letter to the Trump administration, to President Trump, after Jamal Khashoggi's murder, requesting that the Trump administration pursue a human rights investigation into who was responsible for Jamal Khashoggi's murder, and to determine whether or not the administration would impose sanctions on any of those individuals. Now, the letter that the members wrote at that time was a letter based on a law called the Global Magnitsky Act, which allows members of Congress of relevant committees to trigger this sort of investigation by the administration. And so these letters went out in early October after Jamal was murdered, and there's a 120-day deadline on those letters. And so the Trump administration was required by February 8th to respond to the Senate and House Foreign Affairs, Foreign Relations Committees about what they found related to Jamal's murder and who they were going to sanction. Now, in between the sending of those letters and the 120-day deadline, the Trump administration did actually sanction 17 individuals who they found to be responsible in Jamal's murder. But several individuals who media and other intelligence reporting have suggested were involved in Jamal's murder were not sanctioned. And that includes the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And so February 8th, which was the 120-day deadline, passed just a couple weeks ago. Penn and CPJ were actually at the White House protesting and calling for the Trump administration to take action. Unfortunately, they did send a letter to Congress, but it really just said that they had already sanctioned 17 individuals and that they'll keep Congress apprised of their work. And so the tension that exists right now is actually quite complex. I mean, for one, you have an administration that ignored a legal request from Congress. This is not Congress writing up to the administration and saying that, we hope that you're going to do something. I mean, this is something that's based in a law that was passed by Congress and signed by then President Obama. So we're in a situation where you have the administration essentially ignoring human rights law, a very important human rights law. The U.S. was the first country to pass something like that. The other more kind of tricky matter related to the situation is that when the letters went out to the Trump administration back in October, at the time, the top Republican on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, which was in the House and held by Republicans at the time, Ed Royce, and the top Republican on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, then Chairman Bob Corker, have both retired from Congress. And in the House, things have shifted, and so the Democrats have the House now. In the Senate, there's a new Republican who's chairing the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and so you're also dealing with a situation where the administration is not only ignoring Congress, but also, since there's new leadership on these committees, the committees have kind of just only gotten up and running. They're signing their membership. They have a lot on their plates. And so, you're also dealing with a situation where the committees are not necessarily, fully prepared to deal with the ramifications of the administration ignoring their requests.
You also mentioned the Magnitsky Act. Just for our listeners' own information and background, if you can elaborate a little bit on the Magnitsky Act, what it really means, what it's all about, that would be great.
Sure. So the Global Magnitsky Act is actually a law that followed the Sergei Magnitsky Act in the United States, which was passed in, I believe, 2012. Mm-hmm. And that law was focused entirely on corruption and human rights violations in Russia. It's based off an individual named Sergei Magnitsky who died in a Russian prison. And it gave the ability of the U.S. administration to impose sanctions on individuals in Russia who it's found to have been involved in egregious human rights violations. Now, the sanctions that the U.S. can impose under that law are mainly sanctions that relate to freezing assets that individuals may have in the United States and barring those individuals from traveling to the United States. 4 years after that law that was specifically aimed at Russia, Congress then passed a law that President Obama signed, which allowed the U.S. administration to impose these sanctions on any individuals around the world who have been found, determined by the U.S. government to be involved in human rights violations and other forms of political corruption. The interesting thing about the 2016 law is that when it passed, President Obama actually did issue a signing memo alongside the law, which stated that he reserved the right as president to determine whether or not he's going to comply with requests from Congress related to the Magnitsky Act. And so even Obama back in 2016 was reserving the sort of carve-out which allowed him as the president to determine whether or not he wanted to listen to members of Congress writing him letters, initiating a Magnitsky investigation. And that's interesting. And it gets into the weeds about, political power and separation of power in the United States. But at the same time, the Trump administration, when it levied sanctions on 17 individuals, pretty much said that they did respect the power of Congress to initiate these sorts of investigations. So, this administration, it seems, does think that their Congress has power to mandate these sorts of investigations. It's just that they haven't gone as far as their own U.S. Intelligence Committee have gone about who's actually responsible for the murder.
Absolutely, and that's a very important point that we would like to touch upon right after this commercial break. Stay tuned, please.
If halal is important to your family, you can trust that Miramar will offer not only the highest quality halal products, but the best tasting and healthiest foods that can be placed on your family table with confidence. Miramar is the first and oldest halal certified food brand in America, serving the Arab and Muslim community, and offers a wide range of halal food products. Check out Miramar's halal food selection today by visiting Miramar's executive distributor, Ziyad Brothers Importing, at www.ziyad.com.
The Rama Relief Foundation provides humanitarian aid into areas inside of war-torn Syria, as well as aid to the refugees who have fled to the neighboring countries in the Middle East. The foundation offers food baskets, container shipment, mental health, education, soup kitchens, and more. Go to ramarelief.org or call 248-990-4247. Any donation amount made to Rama will go to sustaining many lives. Call now 248-990-4247.
It's all in one grocery store, and that store is Zamzam Fresh Foods Market. Zamzam Fresh Foods Market offers fresh vegetables, halal meats, a great fresh bakery, as well as nuts and spices and much more. They also offer special deals every Wednesday, so don't forget to ask for your favorite foods, as shish kebabs are ready to go. So please stop by Zam Zam Fresh Foods Market at 24065 Orchard Lake Road in Farmington Hills. Their phone number is 248-476-0300. Again, that phone number is 248-476-0300. And they are open from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. Zam Zam Fresh Foods Market is your one-place stop for all your grocery shopping needs and your favorite foods.
When it comes to reproductive medicine, IVF Michigan Fertility Centers are the recognized leaders. With locations in Bloomfield Hills and 5 other cities in Michigan and Ohio, IVF has experts in all aspects of the field. As a founding member of IVF Michigan Fertility Centers, Dr. Nicholas Shama is one of the leading reproductive endocrinologists in Michigan and Ohio. Dr. Shama has performed over 10,000 IVF cases and has helped thousands of couples fulfill their dreams of parenthood. American board certified in both obstetrics and gynecology and reproductive endocrinology and infertility, Dr. Nicholas Shama is a very caring, compassionate, expert physician that understands not only the medical but also the emotional toil of infertility on his patients. When it's time, get personalized care from Dr. Nicholas Shama at IVF Michigan Fertility Centers in Michigan and Ohio. Call toll-free 855-952-9600, 855-952-9600.
This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Join me on the third Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll be discussing some of the most important current political, economic, and social issues in my program, The Bridge. On Radio Baladi, on America's Voice of the Arabs, WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM. Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis, and we're talking today about Trump versus the Congress, the tug of war over the Khashoggi investigation. And with me this morning discussing this important topic are Mr. Michael Dora from Committee to Protect Journalists and Mr. Thomas Melia from PEN America. Tom, I want to turn to you with a question about the checks and balances system here in the United States. Obviously, the United States, as Michael was saying, we have this separation of powers, the issue of accountability and transparency in order to prevent one particular party from taking over. So what are really the limits of both parties in this particular case? I'm talking about Trump here versus the Congress. How much power does each one have in terms of demanding to have a certain fair and transparent investigation, or actually not to have one?
Well, the separation of powers in the United States Constitution is not so much about division between parties as between institutions. So it's important to think about the Congress and its 2 different chambers, the House and the Senate, which are elected on overlapping but a different basis, as separately democratic from the president, who's elected in a sense by the entire American people.
When I said party, I meant different institutions or different groups rather than political parties. Yeah.
Right. So no, we're agreed on that. So what's interesting, and this is, I said at the outset that the United States is unusual among all the democracies in that the legislature does play a very large role in foreign policy making, as it does in domestic policy making. And that's mostly built around the idea that they control the way that money is spent. Mm-hmm. And so often the Congress will attach instructions to the appropriations legislation that essentially writes the checks for the different agencies of government to do their business. And so that's what's happening here, in that the law that Michael described, the Magnitsky Act, creates an obligation for the administration, whoever it is at any given point, to respond to congressional inquiries about human rights violations. And so what happens then is that the Congress, if they're not satisfied with the response they get, or the absence of a response, which is what we're seeing in this case,
right?
Because the administration has decided not to respond to the congressional letter that Michael described a moment ago. So now it's back in the ball is back in the Congress's court. And so there are proposals. Senator Menendez and others in the Senate have proposed legislation that will require the administration to impose sanctions on high-level officials in Saudi Arabia over the Khashoggi murder. And so this will become a battle. If that law were to get enacted by the House and Senate, that will create a higher level of obligation on the administration to impose sanctions or do other measures to challenge Saudi Arabia. Now, of course, the administration might refuse to do that, and that will again create a constitutional battle between the Congress and the president. What's interesting about this, to go back to the party question, is that in the current Congress, of course, we have a Democratic majority in the House and a Republican majority in the Senate. The Senate plays a larger role in foreign policy because they have the job of confirming ambassadors, approving treaties, etc. So they have a slightly larger role in foreign policy than does the House. So the Republican majority in the Senate, what's interesting here is that they're not supporting the president on this, whereas the Republicans in Congress and including in the Senate have very often over the last 2 years deferred to President Trump on many different policy questions.
Right.
On this question, about half of the Republicans in the Senate are opposing the president and challenging him on the basis of his decisions regarding Saudi Arabia. And so I think this makes it a little more interesting politically for us in Washington that we will see a majority, I think, in both chambers that wants to ramp up the pressure on the administration to be much more forceful with Saudi Arabia than it seems that the president wants to be.
But I also want you to, explain to our listeners also what are the limits of power, meaning, how far, in other words, can the Congress go in terms of trying to demand transparency and, a fair investigation in this particular horrific case? Let's say that Trump and his administration do not cooperate and they don't do anything extra or anything to the satisfaction of the Congress. How far can each group go in terms of trying to push its own agenda in this particular case?
Well, the Congress writes the checks, and so they can make it clear in law that money may not be spent on certain things that the administration wants to do. So there have been votes in Congress now opposing the Saudi-led war in Yemen, for instance, and they're on the verge of cutting off all the funding for the Defense Department to support the Saudi and Emirati war in Yemen. So that's ultimately how the Congress can control the executive branch, by cutting off the money that they have for different policies.
Michael, there is a very important point that Tom just mentioned now, and I would like to really focus on it, which is that this is an issue that has been bringing both Democrats and Republicans together, unlike many other domestic and international issues that we know have been divisive between the Democratic and the Republican Party. In this particular case, we are seeing Senator, Marco Rubio, who is a Republican, say, this is a violation of the law that the government, the Trump administration did not abide by the 120-day deadline that was given to it by the Congress. So what does this particular unity between Democrats and Republicans mean at this particular moment in time?
Well, I think it's really important that Democrats and Republicans work together on issues of press freedom, and that's something that I think is important beyond any particular case. Although Jamal Khashoggi's case, I think, is an acute example of the challenges, the threats, the dangers that journalists around the world face. So I think it's really important that both Democrats and Republicans work together on press freedom. I think that's important for a variety of different reasons, and I think the most important one is that press freedom doesn't become a partisan issue. It doesn't become something that any single political party owns. But the other is that to actually achieve progress, to advance press freedom around the world, we really need members of all political parties working together to push forward. It was, I think, a rare, bold, and very heartening move when the original letter came from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on October 10th, after Jamal had been murdered, to see so many Republicans and Democrats on a committee sign on to something completely agreeing to write a letter to the administration triggering this investigation. One of the things that I'm slightly concerned about in terms of future Jamal Khashoggi advocacy in Congress is that when the 120-day deadline passed, the week following that date, we saw a response from Congress. We saw members of the Senate and members of the House, including the chairs and ranking members, write to the Trump administration relaying their disappointment that the Trump administration had not responded in the way that they saw the response coming. And the trouble with that is that the response that came from Congress to the Trump administration was divided. So you actually had a letter come from some of the Democrats who were on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and a separate letter come from members of the Republican Party in the Senate. And that's troubling because it does suggest that potentially, as we continue to move on with Jamal Khashoggi advocacy and all the implications of it, you may start to see some fissures in terms of exactly how Republicans want to hold the administration accountable versus exactly how Democrats want to hold the administration accountable. And so that's a potential minefield that advocacy organizations and we as a country are going to have to face.
And as we mentioned, of course, the important point is the majority now of Democrats as well in the Congress. So, you can also tell us a little bit about what that means moving forward in terms of putting pressure on Trump and his administration in this particular case, and maybe more generally speaking, what could be the significance of having this Democratic majority now in the Congress. And now some of them are also from diverse backgrounds. As we know, we have our first two American Muslim women, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. We have women who are from different backgrounds. What does that mean in terms of this relationship between the different sources of power in this country?
I think that when it comes to Jamal's case and more broadly when it comes to holding the Trump administration accountable on human rights issues for not acting as strongly as Congress would like, I think what we're going to see is the House Foreign Affairs Committee is really going to become a hub of activity and pressure. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee, like the Senate, remains controlled by Republicans, and then Chairman Bob Corker was great on a lot of these issues. The current chairman, Jim Risch, has not been as forward-leaning on some of these human rights issues. And I think that the Democrats retaking the House and now having control of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and then moreover, several new members of the House Foreign Affairs Committee being so dedicated to advancing human rights on their platform. One of these is a former State Department official, Tom Malinowski, who was just elected to Congress and who was involved in a lot of global Magnitsky and other related work at the State Department in years past. And so what you're now seeing is, you have a bunch of new members of the House Foreign Affairs Committee who have come in and are really raring to go. I mean, they want to push the ball forward as far as they can. And so I think what we're going to see over the next couple of months and then throughout the next this session of Congress into the next session of Congress is probably a lot more activity coming out of the House Foreign Affairs Committee in terms of the first action that they took this session was to hold a hearing about U.S. foreign policy in the Gulf. I've spoken with members of the committee who are already talking about pieces of legislation, resolutions, other actions that they can take to hold the administration accountable. What will be interesting to see is how the Senate Foreign Relations Committee will use its tremendous amount of power to influence U.S. foreign policy to continue to push the Trump administration as well. I don't think that we can look at our engagement with Saudi Arabia as business as usual, and it will require the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, if not at the very least its individual members, to put a lot of pressure on the administration to ensure that it's not business as usual with Saudi Arabia.
Absolutely. We'll come back to this important discussion right after this commercial break. Stay tuned, please.
Kashat's Mediterranean Market and Shish Kebab offers a great array of your favorite Mediterranean meals. Meals range from lamb specialties, shawarma sandwiches, seafood dinners, and they offer special big trays of your favorite food, plus much more. Kashat's Mediterranean Market and Shish Kebab address is 32839 Northwestern Highway in Farmington Hills. Their phone number is 248-538-9552. That number again is 248-538-9552, and the supermarket is open from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. Kashat's Mediterranean Market and Shish Kebab will definitely leave you satisfied.
Life is a nonprofit charity that's provided humanitarian aid and development to people and communities for over 25 years, regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background. When disaster occurs here or around the world, Life for Relief and Development rushes in to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. Please help improve these efforts. Make your tax-deductible donation to Life now at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493.
انتهى الاجتماع ومحتارين هناكل فين؟
من الآخر وبدون تفكير أورشد فودز أفضل وأحسن قرار.
عنده أكلات طيبة يا ترى؟
أورشد فودز عنده أفضل تشكيلة من المحاشي والمشاوي والمقبلات والسلطات والفطاير، وكمان بتتسوق لكل احتياجات الجروسري والملحمة وغيره بأسعار خاصة بمناسبة الأعياد، والأحلى إنه بنفس المكان.
على ضمانتك أروح وأجرب.
ولو على ضمانة الشيف، وبجودة وخدمة ممتازة وسعر منافس، ولو عندك مناسبة خليها عليهم.
Orchard Foods and Grocery يقع على Orchard Lake Road بين 12 و 13 مايل في مدينة فارمينغتون هيلز. رقم الهاتف 248-516-3121 248-516-3121.
وعلى رأي المثل لقمة هنية بتكفي 100.
When you're looking for the best in optical care, Dr. Imad Nakash is your doctor to see. With years of experience and thousands of successful procedures performed, you can trust your eyes to Dr. Imad Nakash. See Dr. Imad Nakash and his professional staff for your eye care needs. There's 2 locations to serve you. In Hazel Park, call 248-336-3937. 248-336-3937. In Rochester Hills, call 248-299-3937. That's 248-299-3937.
This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Join me on the 3rd Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll be discussing some of the most important current political, economic, and social issues in my program, The Bridge. On Radio Baladi, on America's Voice of the Arabs, WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM. Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis, and we're talking today about Trump versus the Congress, the tug of war over the Khashoggi investigation. And with me this morning discussing this important topic are Mr. Michael Dora from the Committee to Protect Journalists and Mr. Thomas Melia from PEN America. Tom, there's been a very interesting, weird thing, really, which has been the president going against the reports coming from CIA and FBI, whether in the case of the, the Russian meddling or interference in the presidential elections, or in the case of the Khashoggi investigation, where a CIA report says that, MBS has been involved in this and he has given orders with a high degree of confidence. Yet we see that the president says in both cases, maybe they did, maybe they did not, maybe he did and maybe he did not. What does that mean? I mean, in terms of how can we understand this kind of conflicting vision between the intelligence of the United States and the president of the United States on these 2 sensitive cases?
Well, Dr. Sahar, those are very important points. I want to just mention that I'm going to have to get off the phone in a few minutes. As I explained in an email exchange, I have an overlapping appointment that's about to begin here in Washington. So I'll leave you in the hands of a real expert like Michael to conclude this conversation. But let me just say on your point, what we have here is some very senior and well-respected professionals, both in the intelligence community and some of the political appointees, like Dan Coates, who's a very highly regarded former Republican senator from Indiana and a member of the Senate for a number of years. Those are people who are presenting to the public and to the president unvarnished assessment of what the facts are. And we have the president not accepting facts on the Khashoggi case or on Russian interference in our elections and other matters. And so what I think you have here in the Khashoggi case is the second major episode after the Russian interference in our elections, where the facts are just too clear and too strong for even Republicans who want to support the president to be able to ignore the facts on the ground. And so what we have now is an emerging separation between the intelligence agencies and other nonpartisan parts of our government and the president. And so I think that that's partly why you see Republicans in the Senate distancing themselves from the president and aligning themselves more clearly with the professionals in the intelligence community and in law enforcement. So that's why I think that you're going to begin to see more and more cases like this. The Congress has gone ahead and legislated some very sharp against individuals who it has decided are responsible for both the intervention in Ukraine and in our elections and so on. And I think you're going to see more and more of that on the case of Saudi Arabia now, where the Congress is simply going to go ahead without the president, create laws that will require painful sanctions against individuals and against the government of Saudi Arabia based on the facts as they are known, regardless of whether the president's personal instincts or preferences go another way.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Tom, for being with us this morning, and I hope to have you again on the show in other programs on U.S. Arab Radio. Thank you so much.
I'd be very glad to come back another time. Thank you, Dr. Sahar.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a great day. So, Michael, there's a very important issue here, which is the U.S. moral leadership. Democratic Senator Tim Kaine described this lack of satisfactory response, that is, in the case of the Khashoggi investigation, as a form of moral bankruptcy. So the U.S. moral leadership now is under question when, there isn't really enough accountability in something as important as investigation in this horrific crime. What kind of message does that send about America's moral leadership worldwide?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt that U.S. leadership right now is under fire and under question around the world. We have met with journalists from around the world who have relayed their concerns about the way in which the Trump administration has approached press freedom, the way in which President Trump has spoken about the press, and the implications, the impact of that rhetoric in their country. Seeing elected officials of their own talking about how news outlets are fake news and journalists are the enemy of the people. And so I don't think there's any doubt that this is a real issue. It's something that CPJ, Pan American, other organizations have been tracking very closely, and it's very troubling to see. Jamal's case is a somewhat more acute example of this problem because, in a certain example of seeing a foreign leader kind of use President Trump's quotes about fake news to justify their own crackdowns on the press, it's a bit murky. I mean, you could probably conjure up a situation in which those foreign leaders would go about doing that anyway. But you have a situation here with Jamal in which you had a U.S. resident traveling to a foreign country and murdered inside a Saudi consulate. And then you have the U.S. administration being somewhat reticent to accept the intelligence findings, reported intelligence findings of the U.S. intelligence community, and to pursue real justice in the case of this murder. And so the implication of that, the particular implication of the U.S. administration inaction in Jamal's case, is that Saudi Arabia and perhaps any other country that has a Saudi-type relationship with the U.S. government, green light, basically say, well, if we have dissidents and journalists who we want to get after because we think that they're harming our reputation, they're a threat to the regime, maybe there are ways that we can go about it. And look, the U.S. government really won't go too hard on us. They'll sanction some of the individuals involved, but all the people who pulled all the strings and made all the calls will get away with it, and it will go back to business as usual. That is the real danger. It's a green light to authoritarian regimes to go even more full bore in their crackdown against the press. And that's interesting to see how Congress will respond to this, because if you assume that the administration has essentially finished its response to the Jamal Khashoggi murder, which I think is not out of the realm of possibility, it really falls on Congress to take action and show Saudi Arabia and other regimes who may engage in these kinds of behaviors, that this is not acceptable, and that the ramifications will be that the U.S. government will hold you to account. And there are a number of the ways that Congress can do that. I mean, Tom talked about some of this before. One of the ways in which Congress is doing it now is really examining critically and moving to end U.S. involvement and support for the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen. Now, that's not necessarily about Jamal's case, but it is a consequence of Jamal's murder. U.S. lawmakers look more critically at U.S. support for Saudi Arabia in general. And as Tom said before, Congress writes the checks. So we're in a situation where Congress really has power to hold this administration to account for not responding, and Saudi Arabia to account as well for engaging in this kind of behavior.
But, since you are also from the Committee to Protect Journalists, what kind of message does that also send in terms of journalists, whether those who are working within the Middle East region or those who are actually, exiled opponents of their own respective authoritarian regimes?
U.S. inaction, Jamal Khashoggi sends a message to journalists who are working in dangerous situations around the world, but in particular in the Middle East and Northern Africa, that the United States doesn't have their back, that the U.S. will not stick its neck out to support them, to pursue justice in their case, in the event that in that particular case, the country in which that journalist is working has a relationship with the United States, want to disrupt the relationship. And that's something that we've heard from journalists who were already nervous about, some of their travel patterns. We've already heard from some journalists who are now a bit more nervous, in terms of where they're traveling and what they're doing, because they just don't feel as safe anymore after seeing something like this, which was her crime happened. U.S. inaction no doubt sends a message that the U.S. will not have the back of journalists who are engaging in similar sorts of journalism as Jamal was, in cases when a government is trying to come after you. And that's really scary for a lot of journalists out there, because for so long the U.S. has been, as a government, a force for freedom of the press and a force for justice in a lot of these cases. Now, that's not to say that the U.S. is perfect in any way, but for a long time the U.S. has been a leader on human rights, especially in cases like this. And so to see the U.S. now kind of take this, I don't know if backseat is the correct word, but take a somewhat softer approach, to see the president and the administration essentially doubting some of the intelligence findings and saying that, one was involved, maybe he wasn't, whoever is going to know. This is just the mystery of human life is really, really, I think, dangerous for the long term. And that's why it's so important for Congress now to show leadership, because the administration clearly is not going to.
Absolutely, especially that many of these journalists, journalists/activists, they left their own home countries, living in exile for fear for their own safety, the safety of their lives, the safety of their loved ones and families. So for them not to feel protected is definitely a very dangerous and threatening thing. And definitely I agree with you that U.S. moral leadership is now compromised on this issue and on a number of other issues, really, which sends a very chilling message to those who are doing dangerous journalism within the Middle East and also in the diaspora. We'll come back to this important conversation right after this commercial break. Stay tuned, please.
تعرفوا شيء، احنا كتير بنهتم بالمقبلات بالأكل الشامي،
واحنا بنهتم بالبهارات والتسبيكة في الأكل المصري،
واحنا نهتم هواية باللحوم وجودتها بالأكل العراقي، واحنا في مطعم عشتار نهتم بيكم، اعتمدوا علينا أيا كان. نحن في عشتار نعرف أن لكل مذاق أسرار، فنحن نقدم أجود أنواع اللحوم من ملحمة عشتار الواقعة على 56865 راين رود.
عشتار، قصة حضارة ترويها لكم أطباقنا المميزة في كل زيارة.
تفضلوا بزيارتنا في 3625 East 50 Mile Road, Sterling Heights.
مطعم عشتار بإدارة فادي بهنام وعلي البغدادي. 586-698-2585 586-698-2585.
The Rama Relief Foundation provides humanitarian aid into areas inside of war-torn Syria, as well as aid to the refugees who have fled to the neighboring countries in the Middle East. The foundation offers food baskets, container shipment, mental health, education, soup kitchens, and more. Go to ramarelief.org or call 248-990-4247. Any donation amount made to Rama will go to sustaining many lives. Call now 248-990-4247.
انتهى الاجتماع ومحتارين هناكل فين.
من الآخر وبدون تفكير أورشد فودز أفضل وأحسن قرار.
عنده أكلات طيبة يا ترى؟
أورشد فودز عنده أفضل تشكيلة من المحاشي والمشاوي والمقبلات والسلطات والفطاير، وكمان بتتسوق لكل احتياجات الجروسري والملحمة وغيره بأسعار خاصة بمناسبة الأعياد، والأحلى إنه بنفس المكان.
على ضمانتك أروح وأجرب.
ولو على ضمانة الشيف، وبجودة وخدمة ممتازة وسعر منافس، ولو عندك مناسبة خليها عليهم.
Orchard Foods and Grocery يقع على Orchard Lake Road بين 12 و 13 مايل في مدينة فارمينغتون هيلز. رقم الهاتف 248-516-3121 248-516-3121.
وعلى رأي المثل لقمة هنية بتكفي 100.
Are you going to start a restaurant or grocery store soon? Do you need floor plans and designs? Call Naji Abood at 734-744-9796. Do you want to buy kitchen and restaurant equipment at discount prices? Call Naji Abood now, 734-744-9796. New Concept Products and Design, the trademark of kitchen equipment. 5% discount on all purchases of $75,000 or more. New Concept Products and Design, new location, 31185 Schoolcraft in Livonia. Learn more at www.newconceptproducts.com. Call Naji Abood, 734-744-9796.
This is Dr. Sahar Khamis. Join me on the third Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll be discussing some of the most important current political, economic, and social issues in my program, The Bridge. On Radio Baladi, on America's Voice of the Arabs, WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM. Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is your host, Dr. Sahar Khamis. We're talking today about the tug of war between the Congress and President Trump and his administration on the issue of the Khashoggi investigation. Mr. Michael Dora from the Committee to Protect Journalists is continuing this discussion with us. And Michael, we've seen some reduction in some of the sentences that were imposed by the Saudi government on some of its own opponents and those who are the activists who have been jailed in Saudi Arabia. Some of them are women's rights activists and other political prisoners. We have seen a reduction in the sentences that were given or handed out to them. Could this be like, the beginning of some light at the end of the dark tunnel, as they say, in terms of some of these regimes trying to impose some kind of new chapter of maybe self-corrective mechanism in light of all of the global coverage and attention that the Khashoggi affair has received?
I suppose it's possible that you could view it that way. I think that if you look at the situation holistically, particularly the situation in Saudi Arabia, the Saudi government said that it was going to lift the women's driving ban. I think that there's reason to be somewhat cautious about how much we should welcome that in the year 2018, 2019. That seems like something that the government could have enacted years and years ago. Right. But before they enacted that, they also went around and rounded up some of the women's rights activists who were involved in some of the efforts to get that change accomplished. And I think 4 of those women now are still held in a Saudi prison. There was a Wall Street Journal article a couple of weeks ago alleging that one of them is enduring some pretty severe torture. More broadly, in terms of the work of the Committee to Protect Journalists, we've actually seen since the Crown Prince has taken hold of power in Saudi Arabia, and actually a downturning, a backsliding in the space for dissident voices and for the press. And so we actually had an increase in the number of journalists who are in prison in Saudi Arabia this year. I believe right now it's 16. And we've actually seen, a government that under the Crown Prince has been even more willing to, decimate the space for dissent, because they're trying to promote this image abroad that we are reforming and we are improving, and we want to, welcome in the Western world, by having performers like Mariah Carey, et cetera. And so I think that this is something that Americans in particular need to be acutely aware of, because the Saudi government has tried to lead a campaign in the United States and certainly here in Washington to promote the image of the Crown Prince as a reformer, to promote the image of Saudi Arabia. And, it's not to say that we wouldn't obviously welcome reform by the Saudi regime, because we would, and that's essentially what we're trying to do as an organization. We're trying to improve the press freedom situation in Saudi Arabia, and I think a lot of people in the United States want to see an improved human rights situation in Saudi Arabia. But I think that we need to be very cautious about how much improvement there's been in the country, especially given that Saudi Arabia is investing a lot of money in a PR campaign to promote their image. More broadly, in terms of whether or not authoritarian regimes are maybe taking a turn, it's been a complicated, it's a complex answer, and we've actually seen some improvements in certain countries, but those have been due to political transitions. Ecuador is a good example where the past president was very, very hard on the press, used the power of the government to try to control the press. And the tremendous amount of pressure that was on that president, well, when the new president has come along, he has used that to pivot away from the history of his predecessor and allow for more space for the press and to pursue reforms for freedom of the press in Ecuador. And so I think what's important is that we as a human rights community and people who are concerned about human rights just continue to push, because as you continue to push, you create potential space down the road for when political transitions happen, a country saying that we're going to turn away from what we've been doing and now pursue a new track that allows for human rights and freedom of the press.
Absolutely. Let's go back again to the issue of the punishments. I mean, really, or the sanctions, so to speak. Before the 120 days deadline was over, the Trump administration has imposed sanctions on 17 of the people who were implicated in the Jamal Khashoggi murder. And these really included things like, visa bans. And the Congress said, hey, this is not enough. To just ban the visas or prevent them from getting visas is not enough. There should have been much harsher punishment, especially that those who were, the high-profile figures in this case, MBS himself and Saud Qahtani, for example, have not been, implicated in a sense that has any kind of serious consequences or any kind of really satisfying outcome. So if you can just briefly tell our listeners, what is it that Congress is really demanding or asking for, or human rights organizations asking for, in terms of more serious sanctions or punishments in this particular case?
Sure. So the Trump administration I believe, in November, mid-November of 2018, issued sanctions for 17 individuals in Saudi Arabia who they determined were part of the planning and execution of the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. And to be sure, 17 individuals, many of those individuals were, involved according to reporting. But the list, I think that the main concern from the Committee to Protect Journalists, from members of Congress, is that the list is incomplete. That the 17 individuals who were sanctioned by the U.S. government were not the only 17 individuals involved in the planning, and that further, the individuals who were really at the top of the power structure have escaped punishment. That includes, according to CIA determination and senators who were briefed by the CIA, that includes the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, but it also includes some other officials who are really close to him. Ahmed al-Siri, who is the former deputy head of the Saudi intelligence service, who was also the spokesperson for the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen at one point, is an individual who is very close to the Crown Prince. and he was not included in that list of 17. But I think the main target that Congress is really interested in is the Crown Prince, and what Congress is now pursuing, and particularly in the form of a Senate bill by Senator Menendez and I believe Senator Todd Young, is mandated sanctions. So essentially, this would put the Trump administration in an awkward position of being required to sanction the Crown Prince if it is true that the CAA has determined the Crown Prince is responsible. Now, I think that there's one avenue here that is worth talking about, because when the CIA briefed the Senate in the fall, they didn't brief the entire Senate. They briefed a small set of senators. And the report that Americans are familiar with about the CIA determining the Crown Prince's involvement came out in the Washington Post and the New York Times, et cetera. And these are very trustworthy reports. And the Senate unanimously voted after certain senators were briefed about it to hold the Crown Prince accountable. But we as Americans still don't know exactly what the Trump administration knew about threats to Jamal Khashoggi before he was murdered, because there is now suggestion that the U.S. administration, the intelligence community, actually knew that the Saudis were trying to track Khashoggi and lure him in. And we also don't know what the U.S. administration has determined about who exactly was involved in his murder. We don't have a public report from the CIA that lays out the reasons why they believe this to be true. And I think that one of the first steps that I think Congress needs to take in lieu of this, in lieu of the fact that the administration is not providing information and transparency, is to mandate that the Trump administration release a report stating exactly what they know about the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, because that puts us all on an even playing field. It allows us to look at the information and say, okay, this is exactly what happened. And now we know, well, the Trump administration has not acted to hold people accountable who its own intelligence community has found accountable. Now we know that for a fact. And I think that needs to be one of the first steps that Congress takes.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you. There's definitely a need for more, accuracy, more transparency, more accountability in this particular case, and that's definitely something that we hope to see in the weeks and months to come. Michael Dora from the Committee to Protect Journalists, thank you so much for all the great work that you're doing, and also for being with us this morning on U.S. Arab Radio.
It was a pleasure being on with you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thanks so much to all our listeners everywhere. Thank you. We appreciate you and have a great day. Thank you and goodbye.